Tony, is there any training for making decisions?
Well, it certainly doesn't seem to be in our school education system. My only experience for myself was with Alan Savey's holistic management training, and that was a decision module there. I'm sure that there are a lot more things we could do to build this training for us, to practice it, to build the tools around us. And that's partly what we're focusing on over these webinars, is what tools are out there, how do we find them, and how do we use them are probably the two questions that would need to go on and be asked further on.
But thanks, Cam. And we'll start on a question here and most of them could be either Tony and Cam. We will point out there might be a couple for Cam. But we'll go to Cam straight away, particularly around the glitch, but also the scoring. I've got one here, Cam, for you. Is how does the scoring work? Is it out of 10 for every consideration?
No, the critical part of it is relative to each other. Okay, so you could potentially just have scores of 3, 2, 1 and 0 if all of your most favourable factors you considered equal. So really the scores can be up to any number. It doesn't have to be out of 10. It just needs to be relative to each other. So if you need 10, because some others might be 9 and some might be 5 and some might be 2 as your top values, and that's the only way you can get the relative weighting of them, or the right ratio that you think that's 5 times more important than this one, then you'd use a score of 10. You'll see every example I've got, the numbers are different. So the most important thing in that first step I went through was, what are the highest values relative to each other? Okay, that's the most important thing, because that then sets the range in your scoring. You could be 20 as your top score.
My understanding of that, Cam, is, if you're an older couple, like myself, and, you're in a situation where you don't need much risk, but you don't have to have it. You probably don't have as much debt on the land. You're more comfortable. You would have a lower ranking on choosing more debt, whereas if you're a young family who've just gone out and borrowed money to expand or buy or whatever, you would have a much higher ranking on the risk of finance and the cost of money.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's when I mentioned that idea about it's personal, and risk is personal, and that I can give you examples, and this happens on multiple occasions. People, can I get that example? Because I'll use that example. And I say, really nervous about that, because I want you to think through that. And I want you to change the critical considerations and change the descriptions and change the scores, as you said, to reflect exactly what is relevant to you. So I could do this with 5 people in a group and we get 5 different matrices and slightly different scores. It's very personal, but that's what I like about it. You see, it's not a recipe, it's the process. And once you get into a habit, I can knock these out now with a client in 15, 20 minutes, because I just know the right question, and they finish up and they say, that was fantastic. That really made me think about what was important.
When it comes to market options, is it one market you were targeting, or that unit animal will be able to go into different markets if I'm unable to finish?
I'll let Tony start on that.
Thanks, Cam. Sometimes the market is all important and sometimes it's not. If your decision is destocking during, because of drought or say after a fire, you mightn't have a choice of what market. So you've got to find quickly the best you can do. Often when you're looking at the situation where you need to sell, you need to look at all options. If you've got the feed and you've got the time, you can go through to the specific market, and that's great for the rest of industry because they know the product they're going to get. That's my beef hat talking. But when it comes to making the decision in that time under pressure, it will be a choice of what's available. I've got to go for what's there. So that's not giving you a clear answer, but it's what you've got to do under the circumstances.
Yeah, my comment would be is I'd see this at 2 levels. So one level is what you set your business up for to give you flexibility in markets that potentially you can target. The second one is that in a what you might call a operational, tactical point of view, what am I faced with now and where could I sell and what could I get for them? I know at home our cattle operation, we sell to the long-fed Japanese market. That's our target market. So we aim for high marbling. There's only one at the moment feedlot in the country that takes those, which is Ranges Valley at Glen Innes. So our cattle go from Geelong to Glen Innes for 300 odd days for the Japanese market. That's a fairly specific, fairly tight market. Now, we choose that, but we choose that balanced up against having a sheep enterprise that grows meat and wool. And we also have other avenues that we sell breeders as well. So we choose to be narrow, if you like, on that market, but only because we've got the diversity around other markets. And we're happy to take that level of risk on at the moment. If you weren't happy to take that level of risk on, then you need to set your business up to give you more flexibility in where they can go. So, yeah, that's the way I'd see that decision around markets.
And also currently, with our sheep flock and our cow herd as low as it's been for a long while, there's also a bit of confidence that the herd needs rebuilding. And therefore, some people will be saying, we normally take steers through and finish them. But instead of that, this time we're going to be considering we're going to run more females to keep building up the herd because of those two historic lows.
Yeah. And that is, to me, that's a great decision. Do I keep running steers or do I buy more females? So the decision is, do I buy more females, and then think through the pros and cons of that. And depending on the way your business is set up and what you know about it and those critical factors, that to me is something, if I was sitting with a client and I was asked that question, I would just use the process I just took you through to help inform that decision. And once you get good at it, that's a 20-minute job. Slows down your thinking enough, allows you to have discussion around what are the key things. And if it's, I don't like having to carve down cows, I hate that, someone else doesn't mind it, loves it, really enjoys it, they'll put different weightings on that and they'll be good decision potentially for both of them.
Thanks, Tony. Thanks, Cam. This is a question from me, and it's really just to give you a bit of a demographics and insight into the hunter industry. We have quite a number of different industries. We've got, dairy, beef, sheep, poultry, goat, some smaller industry, free-range chickens. We've also got aquaculture as being on the coast, of course. And our demographics goes from, very small farms through to very, very large farms. With absentee landholders. And I just looking through, Tony, your experiences, and also Cam, the decision matrix tool and your advice, that's relevant to all those people if they're making decisions. Is that correct?
Well, from my point of view, yes, it is. But, particularly around the landscape management and the livestock management. And it doesn't matter whether you're an absentee landowner and you've got that other business away wherever it is, but when you come back to this farm business, it's still a farm business, even if it's a hobby, even if it's your sideline. So you still need to make those decisions, because the last thing you want, if you're a small producer who's earning all your income or most of your income off farm, the last thing you want is an animal welfare issue on your own farm. That's ruining your lifestyle. So at that end of the scale, I think the decision matrix is just as relevant to the other end, where you're talking what you were talking about with either big industries but big scale. To me, it looked like a great tool that actually adds value by giving you that discipline on asking the questions. That's what I liked about Cam. Your thoughts?
Yeah. Yeah, well, first of all, to support exactly what you said, it's the discipline, it's the process. And when I interviewed some what I'd call very good farmers that I see in my district that just have this uncanny knack to make good decisions at the right time. And you think, gee, they're a good farmer. How come they always get it right? They actually have a filing cabinet. They've got a head full of these. They mightn't have written them down on paper, but in 5 minutes they can spit one of those out and they are just fantastic. It's not luck that they're good decision makers. You know, they use a process. So is that relevant to small blockies as well? Absolutely. I mean, we have small blockies where we farm around us, and we're sort of a small blocky in relative scale. But, you know, they'll buy first cross ewes or something and think, oh, I'll just run a few sheep, don't have a proper wool shed, don't have proper yards, can't keep them in, so they get into the neighbours, don't have any of those sort of facilities to actually run them. If they'd gone through a process and actually thought through, well, what do I need to run a good first cross operation? Most of them would have come up negative and they wouldn't have bought them in the first place. They would have been better to buy some merinos or a gist or put a few cattle and a hot wire around the place, you know. And so it's applicable to everyone everywhere. You know, when I get asked that question, I say to people, do you think reading or writing is applicable to a small block owner or a large farmer? And I reckon they're applicable to both. We both need the skill. I don't see this as being any different.
Thanks, Cam.
Thanks, Cam.
Simon?
Yep. Cam, this is a question for both. What role does your personality play in decision making? You've obviously touched on it, but someone's asked a specific question.
Yeah, a very big role. And when I say a very big role, we have a natural, what I might call default position, that if you're not made aware of it or you don't become conscious about it, you'll fall back to doing what you've always done and thinking the way you always think. So some people are just gut feel. Their temperament means that gut feel is a big lever in their decision making. So they will keep making decisions just on gut feel. And you know, you tear your hair out because you're saying they're not looking at the science. Why aren't all the evidence is there? Why are they still doing such and such? It's their temperament that is driving their gut feel. The same as people that just because of their temperament put a lot more, strength in belief. This is what I believe to be true. May not be factually true, but this is what I believe to be true, and therefore all my decisions will be based around that. And there is a certain temperament type that that is a stronger component of their overall decision making. So the important thing is when you're aware of your decision, your temperament, you then become conscious of the ones that you don't use naturally, and make sure that you include them more in your decision making. So when you look at what are the critical factors, and I've seen some farmers do it, and what are the critical factors, and they've listed 3 of them, and they're all gut feel considerations. And I'll say to them, so what facts do you think we should also be including in this? Oh, well, I suppose we should think about such and such, shouldn't we? Because I've heard a lot about that. If I hadn't asked that question and had that process to take people through to think about, so what are some of the facts that we need to think about as well, and how do you feel about that, which is the heart bit of it, we would have made a decision all on gut. So if you're aware of your temperament, you know where your strengths are, you know where your weaknesses are, and if you choose to, you can make sure you address some of those weaknesses. And the decision process, you go through them and go, have I covered off on the facts well enough in these critical factors? Have I covered off on some of the feelings or some of the values that I have in that? And, you know, some of the farmers I've worked with just love the facts. You know, what's the science tell us? But at the end of the day, there are other people around making the decision that the heart is really important. And so understanding your temperament then allows you to know, as I said, where your strengths are and where your weaknesses are in that. And if you choose to, address some of those weaknesses, make it conscious that, okay, have I really covered off on the facts well enough?
So the other way to add to that is not only know your temperament, but also if you need to, bring others around you. Now in the case of a partnership, it's often those on the farm with you, but if you're a sole trader or you're by yourself all the time, who do you bring in? Well, It can be any of the resources around you. And that's what diversity is about, is actually giving you different people, but it'll give you that different levels of temperament or different levels of risk, the different levels of expertise as well, that helps you work through that decision process and gives you that balance that you won't get from just yourself. So just add that to yours, Cam, because that temperament is, and how you feel about things dominates. It's who you are.
Yes, yeah, but having said that, as I've mentioned in my slides, it's about that balance, and so it's, how you feel about it is really important, but that shouldn't be the only consideration in making a good decision. And you'll see that sometimes around people, around whether it's climate or religion or politics or whatever else. Say, almost, let's not think about the facts. I just believe this, and I'm going to stick to that, and I'm going to defend it to the day I die. That's not necessarily good decision making. But I agree with you entirely. I sit on a couple of farm boards, and the farm boards, and the experience I've had where they work well is when we get those diversity of opinions. And I remember sitting on one and having the accountant there as well, and the farmer had just bought a new header and paid $10,000 more because he bought it locally rather than buying it from a big regional centre. And the accountant couldn't work out why he'd spent $10,000 more. And when I asked the farmer, they just said, well, the local fellow gives an apprenticeship every year, so we have a local apprentice there. They sponsor the football and netball club. And for them, making that decision around the $10,000 extra to pay to support someone local was a really good decision and made a lot of sense. Now, the accountant to start with, because all they do, deal with numbers and it's all about facts and what adds up and divides by whatever, didn't recognise that as a possible influence in that decision. When it was, put on the table, he goes, oh, yeah, of course, it makes sense. Yeah, I understand it now. So, having other people around with those different perspectives can be really important. But I'll emphasise you need a process to do that. Otherwise, you just talk around in circles. What's everybody's opinion? And you haven't actually got a process to make it happen.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And the board, a farm board structure and a proper laid out meeting process has properly done it. If I'll take it back to my own family situation, one of the things that was demonstrated to us very early on from outside our farm, but through a group we're involved with, is when it comes to the family farm, have the proper meetings, but start them early and rotate the roles. So it's not always dad chairing and mum taking the minutes. And when you've got the next generation involved in the farm and you're rotating around, it makes for some interesting discussions, but it's beneficial. So.
Thanks, Tony.
Yep.
I've got another question here, and it's for both. Really, the question was, has it been talked about assessing what you bought through the drought and that it is okay to still cull anything not meeting production parameters, taking advantage of the current market? Both two, if you would like to answer that one.
So not culling on what?
So just asking about whether it was talked about whether if you bought through the drought, if it is okay to still cull anything not meeting production parameters and taking advantage of the current market.
I think a lot of people are. One of the advantages of destocking is that you then can look at other options and maybe even look at your enterprise mix. But people who would normally run cow-calf operations or steer fattening during the last few years, I've seen a lot of them buying light cows whenever they've had a rainfall event and taking them through to just to go to the cow market. The market at the moment is good that you can actually do that. The problem we've got now is that it's difficult to find those lighter animals to bring through. There's still a few of them around, but they're harder to find. Cam?
Yeah, my comment would be, this is a classic one of where the process of the decision matrix would help you out. So you've defined that question. Just think about then what are the things potentially that are critically making that decision. And I would say what the cow market is, what the price is like, what sort of feed I've got in front of me. There'll be numerous things that should be considered in that decision. And I reckon if you just made a list, what are the 4 or 5 or 6 things that I really should consider, and use that process, that helps answer that. And so it doesn't become, oh, I'm not sure whether I should do this or not. The clarity around it, because you've thought through what are those things I should be balancing up and which one do I weight more important than others. If you're someone that thinks if you buy animals, they have to be at this stage, or that I can't sell my genetics, then you'll put a different weighting or score on the decision you might make compared to someone else that doesn't really care about it. They're 2 different decisions, but they both could be good decisions to suit you.
Great. We've got 4 minutes left. We've got a couple of questions I think we can get through pretty quickly and worth asking. How far ahead should you be decision making? 1 month, 1 year, 10 years? What's your opinion?
It will vary, depending on what you're aiming at and what, the decision about, let's call it succession planning. The decision about succession planning and what's the farm going to look like for the next generation, it's going to be a long-term one. It'll be 5, 10, 20 years. The decision about, I've got rainfall in February, March this year, how am I going to use that to rebuild my business and strengthen it after the several years before where it's been hammered? So all those, and what I see as the value is that what Cam's showing us is that you can actually use that same matrix there that he's provided to give you the long-term or the short-term decision. And that, Cam, you might ask, I'll ask you the question, can you write in a time frame into your matrix that gives you that perspective about whether it is a short-term or a long-term one?
Absolutely, and that's what the second step was when I said, now what's the timing of this? Part of that is also the time frame. So the example I gave you, as I said, we've got 6 or 8 of these that just come up at critical times of the year, and we pull them out every year. End of May, we do an assessment of do we have enough feed to carry through winter, or do we need to do something? And that can be, depending on where we're sitting, we'll make different decisions on our basis, but they're recurring. So we just have them in the file. And then once we've gone through another year, we check it to make sure it's still relevant, because we may have learnt something from the previous year that should change those scores a bit. Some of them are once in a lifetime sort of stuff. The decision making that farmer did about buying a dairy farm. The whole idea of that was just a once-off decision. It depends very much on what the decision is, and you put a time frame on it. It expires in such and such.
Very good. I think we've got time for one more question, which we've got here. Do you need to work out some outcomes to make the initial decision in the first place? That's
your goals and your vision. That's the big picture of the whole business, the farm and the people. That's my thinking on it. Cam?
Yeah, you've got to have a context for the decision. Okay, so if your longer term picture is to achieve something, and this is if you're almost like a cog in the wheel of that, so you do need that context, that understanding. And so for that farmer, if I take the decision about buying dairy country, he's got 2 boys wanting to come back on the farm, and they're not big enough at the moment. Okay, so that was the bigger picture, the bigger context of where that decision sat. In that, what opportunities does this actually provide for us going forward? And so, the question then came up from that bigger picture, well, do I buy some dairy country? It's pretty cheap at the moment. I said, okay, let's think our way through it. And that's what we did. And as I said, what he's done, I reckon, is a really good decision. And he'll look back on that and go, gee, that was the right decision to make. It actually had a lot of good process behind it to get there.
So I'm just adding to that, my take on it is that when I mentioned the goals and the vision are what the people want. That's what's there. The farm and the business are the tools and the method of getting to where you want. And the decision matrix that Cam's given us today is a great minor tool to help us all the way through make those decisions towards our goals, towards our vision.